Hi everyone! Today I'm going to talk about the essential steps that you need to know to create a simple first project in VSDC. And I will include some sanity tips that will help VSDC to work better for you. Like all other editing software, VSDC has many ways for you to accomplish the same task. I will talk about what is the most efficient method, and I may touch on other methods and highlight the pros and cons of them. By the end of this tutorial, you should be able to finish a first project such as a social media or a home or holiday video. Let's begin. Let's start by creating a new project file. So you will remember from my tutorial 1 that you can open a blank project and choose the settings. In this case, I'm going to use a vertical IGTV profile, which is 1080 by 1920 pixels and 30 frames per second, because that's what I filmed in. So I'm going to call it sample project, and we will create this file. Before doing any editing, the first thing I want to look at is the Proxy Clips settings. Editing is a very resource-heavy activity for your computer because, as I've mentioned, a video consists of many still images, and that's a lot of data. So many video editing software have what we call Proxy Clips, which is the ability to create low-resolution clones of your footage, and therefore you can play back your project smoothly without things crashing or hanging. Where do the Proxy Clips lie in VSDC? Under Options, you have Acceleration Options, and here you have proxies for preview and export. You can adjust these according to the amount of RAM that you have. This drop down here is another place where you can manage the resolution of your playback files. If I click and look at the options here, I have the ability to go all the way up to the original quality. So if I had filmed in 4K, it could go all the way up to 4K. Normally you will not want to do that. I have filmed in 1080p, but I'm going to choose 720 in order to reduce the load on my computer. To start with, you need something to edit. The most efficient way of importing files is to open them up in Windows Explorer. You will then multi-select all these files, and you can just drag and drop the whole lot into your resources window directly. The import is going to take a few minutes, but it's still a pretty quick and stable process. In this case, I am importing 26 files in all, 24 video clips, 1 audio clip, as well as 1 still image. And you can see that VSDC, after importing the files, is able to discern what type of file it is. So it's going to tell you in the resources window which files are videos, which ones are audio, and which ones are still images. A little bit of theory here. When you are importing files into a project, you're not really pulling the whole file in, but you are creating a connection so that VSDC knows where to find the file. As you edit, you are applying different types of changes, and so VSDC is going to process these changes for you when it processes the final project. So when I open an old project, like for example this one right here, there's going to be this prompt here that asks me to provide the new path for the file because I have moved the file from one location to another location. So I'm going to click onto it, and then I will need to look for the file in its new location in Windows Explorer. There are a few other ways that you can import footage, albeit less efficient. The first is that you can choose import content when you are creating your project. Then what you will do is to navigate to where your footage is, and you can select a few files here. And then when you click open, it is going to create the project with these files directly in the timeline. And the order of the files will be according to their file names. So the file name that is the smallest is going to appear in the timeline first. This is only an efficient way if you have everything filmed with one camera, so that the order of your file names is also the order in which everything was filmed. At the same time, that also means that you would want things to appear in your project in the sequence that you're filming, so you would have filmed in the chronological order for your project. Yet another way of adding files is to add them one by one, and there are 3 paths to do this. There are these buttons alongside the toolbar. There is also the Add Object menu within the Editor menu ribbon, and there is the plus icon, which you can hit here in the resources window, which also gives you a way to add new files. This is really very sequential and a little bit slow because you have to think through, are you adding a still image, an audio file, or a video file, and then go in and add the file one by one. So I will only recommend this method in two scenarios. The first is if you're just starting out and feel overwhelmed with too many files, then you might want to start building your story one file at a time. The other is if you have one stray file that's located in a completely different location from everything else. Before I go on to the actual editing process, I wanted to walk you through the various buttons at the bottom of the resources window. We have gone through this one before. It is for you to add files one by one. This download button is for you to select something here, and then you can save a copy of it into a folder in Windows Explorer. This icon here is for you to preview anything that you have in your resources window. So if I click this, it's going to give you a playback window for your clip, and you can play the clip before you decide to put it into your timeline. And this is pretty self-explanatory. If there's any clips that you want to remove from your project, you click this and then you can delete a clip. Alright, now we've come to the part that is right at the heart of the editing process, which is to build and to tighten your story in the timeline. You may have heard of the term called non-linear editing. That applies not just to VSDC, but to a lot of other modern editing softwares as well. And the reason why it's called non-linear is that there are no permanent changes being made to your source footage, so you can rearrange and duplicate things in any order that you want. That is why I have called out some processes as making sense only if you film in the order that you are going to use them in the video. Because in non-linear editing, you have the freedom to film things in any order and then to rearrange them any way that you want in the eventual video. Let's start with our very first clip. I'm going to take this clip and drag and drop it from the resources window into the timeline. So letting it go here, you will have two options to add as a video or as an audio. Choose video because when you choose audio, it means that you are stripping out the sound only and not using the pictures in the clip. I'm going to pull it so that it starts at the 0 point in the timeline, which is the very start of the timeline, and start playing it to identify where I want to cut the clip in. To stop the cursor, I have two options. One is to use the play pause button in the toolbar, and the other is to hit the space bar. That is the most quick way that you can react, so try to remember the keyboard shortcut. Now I'm going to cut the clip, and the fastest way to do this is to hit Ctrl and K. Then you will see that there is a vertical line going down the clip in the point where the cursor is, and if I move my cursor away, you're also going to see that there is a red arrow which shows that you have made a cut here. You will also see that both parts of this clip are surrounded in green at the point where you have cut, which means that you are selecting both pieces, the piece that you want and the piece that you don't want. So you have to unselect the clip, click somewhere else in your timeline. Then click the part that you want to delete, hit delete and it goes away. And then you can move this clip right to the beginning of your timeline again. Here's a sanity check to make sure that you're not leaving any blank space at the beginning of the clip. You can go to the properties window with the clip selected and go to object creation time. You're going to see a time code with milliseconds as well as with frames, and you would want that time code to be all zeros and to start from frame 0. Now with my cursor right at the beginning of the timeline again, I'm going to hit the space bar or hit play, and then I'm going to play till the point that I want to stop the clip again. So like this, stop, and then I can cut it with either a Ctrl K, or if it is hard to remember and I want to use the mouse, I can come up to the editor ribbon menu, look for the razor icon and then click it, and then again it makes a cut, and so I will deselect and delete. This leaves me with the piece that I want to keep, and I can repeat this process with the next clip. So this is the next clip in my sequence, and I'm going to drag and drop it in again. And it's going to want to make its own layer. So VSDC will put it in its layer so that it gives you the most flexibility. But to make them run in sequence, I'm going to pull them all to the same layer, and I can repeat this process. To close the gap between the two clips, I have two options. One is to select both, which I can use Control and click, or I can simply drag my mouse to make a selection like this. So it's very PowerPoint-like. And then I can click this button on the toolbar, which brings the two clips together. I can play with playback on the timeline in a number of ways. One is by hitting the play button to play at normal speed. Or else I can hit this button here, which will jump by 1 second each time. Or I can hit this button here, which will take me right to the end of the clip. These are the rewind buttons back to the end of the clip and back by 1 second. As you edit, there will undoubtedly be points when you've done something too hastily, and then you need to reverse it. So I'm going to show you how to undo. I'm going to undo this. So undo means Control Z, or you can go to Edit and hit undo, or you can hit undo on the ribbon menu here. Right now I've lost my timeline cursor. When does this happen? Typically it is when I have made big changes in the length of my project. For instance, here my time code is at 26 seconds, but I only have about 14 seconds worth of things in my project right now because I lopped a big piece off one of the clips. How am I going to bring the cursor back? Well, I can just reopen the scene. So I'm going to just go to Sample Project, and then I'm going to click Scene 0 again, and that brings back what we call the workspace. The workspace is defined by these two rectangle sliders at the top of the timeline. You can pull them out, and the cursor is free to move between these two sliders. I'm going to hit play here, and you can see that the cursor is going to stop once it hits the second rectangle. That's the end of the workspace. So the workspace defines the area within which you are able to play back and make edits with the cursor. And the reason why it exists is that if you have an incredibly long project, it gives VSDC a space that it has to process your thumbnail images, and it doesn't have to worry about all the other parts of the project. By the time you've built up your story substantially, you may find that the amount of footage you have on your timeline is huge. In this case, I have about 10 minutes of video, but I really want to focus on the first few shots. So what I can do is to start zooming into the timeline. There is a slider here, and if I pull, I'm going to find that it goes into the timeline in bigger and bigger detail so that you see some chunks of your timeline instead of the whole thing. All the footage on my timeline spans a longer period than what I have zoomed into, so I would need to use this slider to move back and forth in order to go to different spots in the timeline. I can also hit the time code here, double click it, and then type in the time code that I want to go to. Suppose I want to zoom back out again to see all the footage that I've got. Then I can hit this icon to the left of the zoom, and that is going to give me 100% timeline scale. This means that everything that is in this scene is going to show up on my timeline and be visible again. Now I'm going to show you a few other ways to cut clips in VSDC. None of these are quite as elegant as the splitting clips function, although they help you in terms of reducing the number of delete keystrokes that you need to make. Let's start with trim start and trim end. I want to end my clip here. What I can do is to go to the editor toolbar and then click this drop down and hit trim end. What it does is it does not just cut, it also deletes everything afterward. The other way that you can cut is to trim out fragments. There's going to be a big middle part of this that I don't want, so I can put a marker here so that I remember it and then continue to play. Let's suppose that the part I don't want is the space between these two markers. So I can set my workspace at these two markers, which means that these two rectangle sliders on the top of my timeline, I'm going to position them where the two markers are. I can then go to Editor, hit Cut Out Fragment, and what it does is it closes up that space in here so that when I start to play again, I will find that it jumps straight from this frame, cuts out everything in between, and there you go. Yet another way to cut a clip is to drag the edges in using your mouse. So this original clip here is 48 seconds long. Let's see what happens when I drag this edge in. Now the new length here is 34 seconds. If I play it from the start, it's actually going to start at the original point. However, it's going to cut off before the end of the clip. And then if I want to bring back the missing part of the clip, I just need to pull it out. And then if I play, you're going to see that it extends longer this time now that I've pulled it out. This way of cutting is less exact because it is harder to maneuver your mouse to the exact frame that you want. But it is useful if you want the flexibility to adjust where you want your clip to end, simply because this is the only way that you can recover parts that you have cut off. If you are using any of the split or trimming tools, you would not be able to get the footage that you have cut off back again without pulling the original clip back from your resources window into your timeline and recutting it all over again. Part of editing is about making your narrative leaner by making scenes move as quickly as possible. One of the ways that you will do this is by cutting down your scenes. So I will talk about how to cut scenes to a specific number of seconds. In this case, I have a clip that doesn't really do much, but it is still 86 frames or almost 3 seconds. So what I can do here is I can type in the number of frames that I want. In this case, I want it to be just 1 second, so I'm going to put in 30 frames. The other is by adjusting your speed so that you are able to see the entirety of an action, but it's sped up in order to be more dynamic and move faster. So here, for example, I want to show that this pan is filling up with oil. So I don't really want to cut this clip, but it's taking way too long to fill up with oil. So I'm going to just stop it here. It's almost 8 seconds, and I want this to go by in probably about 2 seconds or so. So I'm going to select this clip, go to the Properties window, and you can find a box here for speed, where you can adjust the speed. 400%. That will shorten this clip until it is just under 2 seconds long. Similarly, you can use speed adjustments to do slow motion. Here is one example. This clip is 42 frames. Let's say I want to move it to half speed, so 50% speed, and you can see that it's now double its duration to 84 frames. So playing it back, so that didn't look too spectacular, did it? That is why you have high frame rates of 60 and 120 FPS to film your original footage on action cameras, so you can then slow down the clip to create slow motion and it will still look good. After you've built your timeline, it should look something like this, meaning a series of clips that are all on the same layer. Notice that when you're pushing clips together on the same layer in VSDC, it isn't going to allow you to overlap the clips. So what's going to happen is that there will be a hard cut between the two clips. This is what a series of jump cuts is going to look like. You will jump from one scene to another one, with the last frame of the first going directly to the first frame of the second seamlessly. There are going to be times when you don't necessarily want to do that. For example, if you want to show that a period of time has passed, you might want to put a transition between the two scenes. Here I've laid out the last 3 shots. You have the shepherd's pies and you put them into the oven, and then afterwards you have the final product. You can see here that I've shifted the 3 clips so that they are going to have an area of overlap between each of them. This is where I'm going to put my transitions. Also pay attention to the order of the layers. The chronological order here is that you have the shepherd's pies that are uncooked sitting on top of the oven, and then I put them in. And then after that, you have the baked pies. And I'm putting them earlier clip on top of the later clip so that when the earlier clip transitions out, you are going to see that moving away and revealing the next clip below it. You can change the order of the layers using these 4 arrow buttons on top of the screen. So you select the layer by selecting here, and then you can move it. So this is up 1, down 1 layer, or for example, you can skip all the way to the top or the bottom by using these, all the way up and all the way down. And within the Edit ribbon toolbar, you can find these same buttons as well. Now for putting in the transitions, the most common transition you will encounter is a fade in and fade out. When you click into any clip like this, you're going to find that there's a new tab coming up on the timeline. So this clip here, its duration is 7.7 seconds. And when I click into this timeline here, it is also going to be a 7.7 second timeline, because this timeline starts when the clip starts and it ends when the clip ends. So it's talking about time within the clip, not within the larger scene that the clip is in. One of the quickest ways to add a transition now is to use this new feature called the Templates Explorer. It contains a bunch of folders where all the effects as well as the transitions are stored. And for fades, you go into transparency where you have fade in and fade out. So I'm going to fade this in here. I'm going to create a crossfade so that you can see the fades. So I'm going to select the clip before this and also drag in a fade out. So you can see here that the two are fading into each other and there is a place where they overlap. Aside from fades, there are other transitions that you can play with for a little bit more fun. There are 2 folders with transitions. One is under Video Effects and Transitions, and this is where you can find the newer transitions such as Shattered Glass and Paintbrush, which are from the recent last 2 versions of VSDC. There's also this folder called Transition Collection, which contains most of the older transitions that VSDC has. One thing you need to be really careful about is that not all of the transitions are smart enough to know whether you are transitioning in or out. Let's take this example of Diffuse FX, which is one of the older transitions. I'm going to drag and drop it down into this end of scene, so you can see that the shepherd's pies actually transition out to the oven as is intended. But if I was to put it into the beginning of the scene instead, what it will do is it's going to take away the scene and then it jumps back in. So that's not what you want. And to make sure that the scene is transitioned in, what you can do is you can right click here on the timeline of the scene, go to Video Effects, go to Transitions, Diffuse FX, and you are going to say from the start of the scene and go in. So then that will insert it automatically to the start of the scene's timeline, and you are going to get it in the correct direction, meaning that from black into the scene instead of from the scene out into black. Another thing you might want to do is to add background music to your videos. You would have imported the music as an audio clip. You need to take it and drag and drop it into your timeline as a separate layer so that the music plays at the same time that your video plays. It's possible that your background music might be too loud, so then you are going to need to reduce the volume. Click onto it, go to the Properties window. That is where you can change the audio volume in decibels. About 6 decibels is a factor of 2, so if you increase by 6 decibels, you are increasing the volume by 2 times, and a decrease of 6 decibels means that you're decreasing the volume by half. In this example, I have decreased by 12 decibels, so that is 1/4 of the volume. Let's play it again and see if it's now the right volume. Also, I'm going to show you that the order of the audio layers versus the video layers does not matter. I just played this with the audio being on the layer below the video. I'm going to swap them right now, and let's play this again. It doesn't make a difference because you are not looking at things on the screen. The audio is playing and you can hear it, while the video is what you see. So that is why it doesn't matter which is on top or below. What does matter though is the sounds that you hear on top or below each other. So let's say here I want to hear the sizzling sound of the frying pan. and I'm going to look at which time this appears in. It is 5 seconds, 0.733. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to look for the 5-second mark. I can insert an audio effect here to reduce the volume even more. So that means I'm going to say amplify. I'm going to adjust this to the right length of time. And then I'm going to play to show how the volume decreases just for that scene. This is called audio ducking. And because I have enabled smoothing here, it's a smooth reduction in volume that goes back up again after your main audio has finished. You also want to adjust your background music to the same length as your video. So the length of this is 56.866, and I'm going to change the duration here to the same length as the video. And then I want it to fade out. So then I'm going to click this, go into the timeline of the background music, and I can go to the audio effects and put in a fade out. And this fade out, I can drag it out for a while so that it will be audible. And in Pro, you have this audio waveform which shows the sound and its volume. But in Free, you're not going to have the audio waveform, so you're going to have to rely on listening instead of being able to see it in the timeline. Similarly, you can also do a fade in at the beginning. So you take fade in, pull it into the timeline of your audio, stretch it out, and you're going to have this. One of the other things you might want to do is to insert titles into your video. To put in the title, you're going to click this text icon where you can insert a text, and this dialog box comes up. You will want to use from cursor position so that you can position your cursor wherever in time that you want your title to appear. So in this case, I want it at the very beginning of the video. That's why my cursor is right at the beginning of the timeline. Then you always want to add a new layer. Because this gives you the most flexibility, you can then change it to any layer that you want to consolidate it into afterwards, but it allows you to move it anywhere in the timeline that you want it to be. I am going to create this text box, and then I can type in anything that I want, similar to PowerPoint. If you go to the editor ribbon, you are going to find all kinds of ways that you can adjust the text. You can adjust the alignment, for example, center alignment here and center in the text box. You can resize the text box. You can also change the font, and it is going to have all the system fonts that you have on your computer. I want to talk a bit about brush color and contour color. So brush color is going to give you a kind of background to your text, and contour color is going to give you an outline to your text. This menu has the contour thickness, so if you increase that, that's going to increase the thickness of the outline. After you've dealt with the position of the text on the screen and its look and feel, you have to deal with the duration of the text in the timeline. By default, VSDC is going to occupy the rest of your space all the way from the starting point that you choose in the timeline. So most likely you're going to have to shorten it. You can do this in the same way that you would cut a clip, by pulling the end in on the timeline like this. And to fine-tune, you can go into the Properties window and you can adjust the duration here. The other thing you can do is to add transitions to the text like you would to the scenes. So for example, I'm going to add a fade out here, and you can see how it plays out. As you have more and more footage and make changes, one of the sanity savers is the ability to auto-save whatever changes you make. I'm going to show you where the auto-save function sits. Click on Options here, and you are going to have saving options. This drop-down is going to give you the opportunity to choose an interval to autosave at. You can also choose the number of files that you save. So here, for example, 3 files means that it's going to save 3 files, each of them taking a step back in your change history. In VSDC, you see the word object very often. So I want to spend a little bit of time to talk about what is an object. If you open up the Objects Explorer, you'll get the best idea. Any subsection of a clip can be an object, so can music as well as effects. In other words, anything that can appear in the timeline, and by the timeline I don't just mean the main timeline of the scene, but also nested timelines within the various media that you have. They are all objects. And why is this important? Well, object comes from object-oriented programming, so I'm not going to go into the depths of that. It's a nerdy computer engineering kind of term, but every object can have its own set of properties. So anything in the list of objects will have its own properties box. You can see here that these are audio effects within an audio clip, and each of them, when I click on it, it has its own properties box. But at the same time, each of the media that are within the main timeline, they are also objects and they have their own properties as well. And changing all these properties is what makes VSDC so powerful in terms of being able to customize almost everything. I hope that you found this information useful. There's a lot more to share, but I wanted to share just enough for you to have a successful first project. After this, in my next tutorial, I'm going to jump into how to export your finished project so that you can finish and export a first video before I go more in-depth into the various features of VSDC all over again. Thank you for watching and see you next time.